It is said that every silence has its own voice, and one merely needs to put an ear to the right fissure in the cosmos to hear it. Valery Zaslavsky was a man whose life was made of such silence. He was a restorer, a healer of aged paper, a surgeon for books whose binding bones had decayed and whose cover skin was riddled with sores. His world smelled of dust and glue, a world of quiet archive chambers where the only events were the squeak of a cart or the rustle of a turning page, a sound like a sleeping person's sigh. He didn't complain, but a deep melancholy resided within him. He saved others' words, others' thoughts, frozen in ink, but his own life seemed to him an unwritten page already yellowed by time. He was a custodian of forgotten heritage, an unnamed guardian of a sepulchre of lost meanings. It wasn't grief, but a weight, flat as a lead slab on his chest. Everything changed when a box of remnants from a private library, damaged by dampness, was brought to him. Among the sticky clumps of paper, smelling of decay and river silt, he found a single, surviving fragment. It wasn't text. On a scrap of parchment, thick as tanned leather, was a drawing of a woman's face rendered in a single, fluid, confident line. The face was barely sketched, yet the eyes gazed with such lively mockery, as if they knew everything about him, Valery. Beneath the drawing was a single word. Mara. At first it was merely professional curiosity. Whose hand? What era? He set aside all other work, dedicating himself to this nameless face. He studied the ink's composition, the parchment's fiber structure, trying to build a bridge of facts to this lost soul. But there were no facts. Mara was a nobody, an anonymous sketch in the margins of history. And then his work changed. He ceased to be a researcher. He became a conversationalist. On long evenings when the archive plunged into thick darkness, he would lay out the fragment and speak to her. He told her about the emptiness of his days, and in the curve of her drawn lips, he imagined an answer. He began to recreate her story not from documents but from his own imagination, from the depths of his melancholy. She became his secret purpose, his only true calling. He wasn't saving parchment. He was saving her from oblivion. This seemed to him the highest form of service, the most noble endeavor of his life. He didn't notice how his own face in the dark window's reflection took on features of gaunt obsession, nor how the shadow from his bowed head grew longer and denser, as if drinking the lamp's light. He gave her a life woven from his own. His devotion reached its limit. The air with which he nourished her was becoming too thin. His imagination was merely an echo, and Mara needed a voice. His memories were gray ash, and she required a body of solid, undeniable facts. The void from which he molded her began to demand real clay, real flesh. He understood that to create her meant giving her someone else's already lived life, like giving an orphan the clothes of a deceased person. He needed not just parchment, but a biography, a vessel already filled with someone's fate, which could be scraped clean and refilled. And fate, as obliging as any temptation, presented him with such a vessel. It was brought by a young intern, Pavel, a youth with burning eyes and hands not yet familiar with the weariness of the craft. This was his first discovery, his treasure, bought from some junk dealer for a pittance, a small folder of girlish letters from the early last century. 170 pages of the thinnest paper, covered in pale, flowing handwriting. A story of first love, hopes, disappointments, the quiet, unremarkable life of a certain Anna Voronskaya, dissolved in time without a trace. Pavel was on the verge of his first small discovery. He spoke of his Anna with the tenderness of a pioneer preparing to publish an article about her in the archive bulletin. Zaslavsky listened with polite indifference, but inside him, everything froze. He looked at these neat stacks of letters and saw not Anna's story. He saw empty chambers, a perfect home for Mara, a plan matured in his mind, cold and flawless in its monstrosity. He was not an evil man. He had simply become a priest to a deity that demanded sacrifices. And what was the life of one long-forgotten girl against that which was the meaning of his own existence? Dust against fire. He convinced himself it was not murder, but resurrection. He wouldn't destroy Anna. She was already gone. He would merely borrow her shell for someone who was more real than all these paper phantoms. He worked nights, like a grave robber, exhuming someone else's memory only to bury it anew under a different name. His skill, his entire life dedicated to preservation, was now turned to destruction. He knew compounds that could bleach ink without damaging the fragile paper. His scalpel peeled away layers of letters, like a surgeon removing diseased skin. But beneath it, he found not healthy flesh, but only a pristine void, ready to receive a new seed. And then, mixing inks according to ancient recipes, he began to write. He inscribed Mara's life onto these blank pages, the very life he had concocted in long conversations with the portrait. He gave her parents, a home, lovers, and enemies. He made her an artist, a rebel, a woman whose laughter could shatter glass. He wove genuine historical details into her fictional biography, creating a flawless forgery in which truth served as a framework for a grand lie. When the work was finished, he returned the folder to a bewildered Pavel. The intern couldn't understand what had happened. The text was different. The name was different. This was not his quiet Anna, but some fierce, unknown Mara. Pavel tried to prove something, stammering about his discovery, but before him lay authentic letters from the turn of the century, written with authentic ink. An expert analysis would confirm their authenticity. The young man looked at the ruined pages, and his face was that of someone who had peered into an empty cradle. He was accused of negligence, of damaging documents, perhaps even of attempted mystification. His career, before it even began, turned to dust. Zaslavsky observed this from a distance, without a trace of sympathy. He felt no guilt. He had made a sacrifice. He had given a real, albeit small, life on the altar of one woven from his own emptiness. And for the first time in many years, he felt not like a custodian, but a creator. A god, passing judgment over dust. Victory brought no peace. It brought a silence even denser than the one that had lived in the archive before. Zaslavsky waited. He waited for the world he had created to respond, for Mara, who had received the flesh and blood of another's biography, to speak to him. But the portrait on the parchment looked at him with the same frozen mockery. He had gotten what he desired. His fiction was fixed on paper, authenticated by time and ink, indistinguishable from truth. But his deity remained a silent idol. One night, rereading his creation, he noticed it. On the page where Mara fiercely described her breakup with yet another admirer, one word was alien. It was written more faintly, with a different curve of the letter. Forgive. A word that could not exist in his rebel's lexicon. A word from Anna Voronskaya's quiet world. Zaslavsky attributed it to a trick of the light, to tired eyes. Carefully, with his finest scalpel, he scraped away this defect and inscribed the correct letter. But a week later, on another page, an entire phrase emerged, faint as a spiderweb. I'm so afraid to be alone. It was Anna's handwriting. It showed through his bold, confident lines, like a drowned body surfacing on dark water. Zaslavsky grew cold, he understood. The paper remembered. The compound he used to erase the previous text was imperfect. The memory of the ink, absorbed into the fibers a century ago, was stronger than his chemistry, stronger than his will. Anna's ghost was returning, not as an apparition, but as text. His service took on a new, monstrous form. He was no longer a creator, he became a jailer. Every day he would lay out the letters before him and, armed with a magnifying glass, search for the emerging traitor words. His life turned into an endless restoration of his own lie. He erased Anna's timid confessions, only to write Mara's furious manifestos in their place. He scraped away her hopes to etch his heroine's cynicism onto the parchment. He wanted to give his Mara eternal life, but instead, he was condemned to an eternal war with a dead girl over a single scrap of paper. He didn't create a new world. He merely became a lifelong guardian at the border of two stories, doomed to forever patch the cracks in his grand forgery, through which a quiet, relentless truth seeped.